Hello, this is Dylan with the Embroidery Warehouse, and today I'm going to show you how to remove this control panel. So with this machine, you're going to have 4 screws in each corner for these X-type control panels. And then what I'll show next is the removal of the plugs that are housed in that lead to your machine. And then the other items that will need to be removed to fully complete this control panel removal. First, I'll start with the Phillips and remove these 4 Phillips. Now, when you remove this, you'll want to be careful of these 4 screws. If you can take them out manually, do so. If not, you can just slide it out gently and have all the screws stay stationary. Now, your control panel is going to have some connections in almost every different way. But what we're going to focus on in this lower plate here, and the removal of each one of these different plugs. So here you'll go and remove just a few different screws here. Try not to strip them like I do. And of course, as always, make sure your machine is turned off and any static charge on your person has been discharged by touching bare metal, either on the frame of the machine or elsewhere. Now we have the 4 screws here, but then we also have these down here that hold in place. So 4 small and 2 big. So there's kind of a little holder right here that'll hold your panel here, but you'll be able to access mostly to these components here. So our main screws or plugs are going to be in this area, and I'll get a closer shot in this next scene. Now the main plugs you want to pay attention to and write down. I like to take pictures just so I know where my plugs are going to be and how they're going to be plugged back in. Tajima is very helpful when it comes to labeling their labels on their plugs. So in this case, I have CN11. I'll just pinch, squeeze, pull it out. Then I have CN2. Now, if I look at the cables coming through, I also have these 2 sensor cables plugged in. Now, some of them might have a pinch and pull, some of them are just pull. This case is CN6. This is going to be your emergency stop sensor area. And then other sensors, like this one's a pinch and pull. CN5. Now, lastly, we have this one here. And it actually goes up to a USB hub right here. So we'll pull that one out as well. Now with our plugs removed, pictures for reference before we unplug them. And we can see that every plug that leads from this control arm here that holds the control panel has been removed. We can now progress further by removing the control panel. Now we're going to take this screw here and another one on the other side and loosen those so we can pull the control panel up. So with the control panel here, you're going to remove one set screw and remove the other. some cases they're all in one, in others they're not. But they're going to be held in by a bolt, so eventually they'll slide out, just like this. So I got one, and then two. Then as I lift up, I'm going to make sure all my loose items are taken care of. So gently pull up and help guide out these connections. Now the C11 you could leave plugged in, but it's just to gain better visual access for the lower one. And this is how you'll remove it. Keep in mind of that back plate up there. So in regards to the control panel stand, those two side screws I took out, they're held in by these bolts here. Now when you loosen them all the way, there's a chance for these bolts to fall into that control arm. And here's how you access those just in case that happens. So in this case, you'll want to assess where they've located at. And what you can do is remove this screw for the emergency stop and this one. So when I do this, you want to make sure you keep track of where they fall if they do, and if not, you can remove this and reach inside to access them if they've fallen down in that case. For removal of this item here, there's usually a little tension screw to be able to remove this. And in most cases, you want the metal band to protect this plastic housing. Now these, fortunately, are actually pretty easy to find online, new actually. So it's not a worst case scenario, like a $20 part, but this is what holds your control panel in securely, especially while you're embroidering. If it's one of our machines, it's going to be about 1,000 RPM usually. So when you tighten it down, this will set where you want it at and secure it. Now the tricky part is when you reinstall this control panel is keeping this bolt from falling inside over and over. And I'll tell you, it's really a pain. And my favorite thing to do is to add just a very tiny drop of super glue right there in that corner. Tuck it in, let it dry. Usually I'll try to set the set screw in beforehand so it holds it in place correctly in the height. And I'll demonstrate that here shortly when I free up this other hand. So when you get ready to reinstall this, you'll want to get just some simple super glue. And what I do is I'll get a single drop, just kind of put it right there on the corner. Like I said, we'll want to insert it in. That way it'll hold itself, but also keep in mind to put this screw back in so it holds it into place. And then hold that in place until that glue dries and you're able to remove this without this falling. And that'll save you a lot of headache and a lot of time in reinstallation of that control panel. So now that my glue is dried, I'm not going to lose my screws here and I can still take them out and they are in the correct position. So it's very helpful to have these and be able to keep peace of mind that you're not going to spend 45 minutes trying to get two screws in. You can tell I've been through it, so I understand. Now, what I'll do is grab my control panel down here and I'm going to put it back on just how I took it off with guiding these wires through and then reattaching those connections. All right. So, got my little plate here. I'm going to put that to the side. You may want two people to do this because this control panel is everything that makes your machine run aside from just direct power. It's its brain, its communication, and probably the most expensive part on it. So as you put it on, you want to make sure all those wires are clear, and you have the ability to slide that back in safely. Just like this. Got my cords through. Now what I'm going to do is just secure it on the mounts here first, so it doesn't have the chance of falling over and straight to the floor. You may have to lift up and then twist in to get that screw in. Now you don't want to over tighten them because it is meant to be an adjuster. So my drill, it's kind of set up that way, but you just want it about hand tight because it is just plastic on plastic. Now for the reconnections. Given the circumstances, I can't provide the best angle, but written on the circuit board here, as you can see, like in some cases here it says C14 or 41, so on and so forth. So we're going to connect these matching plugs to those matching what they're called silk screen writings. So the top one is going to be C11, CN11. The bottom one is CN2. So I'll plug in CN2. And these plugs, these grooves are different on each side. So they only allow one way to go in. Usually 3 on top in orientation of sanding. So put this one back in. I'll put our CN5. Now, in some cases you might need a tweezer because these are a little bit tight to get in. The other one here. You want to force anything, you want to just kind of slide in like it should. If you have to force it, then it may be in the incorrect orientation. As well as there are certain ways you have to put them in some cases, like the pinch ones here, or just the slide locks to it. I'm gonna get my USB that I had for the other side up here. Just gonna plug that right in. Now you want to make sure they're all in and secure, and sometimes even taking out and plugging back in a second time will help the connectivity of everything, because with these control panels, Tajima made it to where every USB is a sensor essentially. So sometimes, you know, if you plug in a USB stick and it doesn't ring and plug it in again and then it does, in that case, if you run into sensor issues or anything like that, it's always a good check just to unplug and replug the USB connections. Now for the back unit here, there are 2 connections as far as power and micro USB. I did not show that in the earlier portions, so I'm plugging back in this USB. And then we have this power. We'll be careful with this one, it's a little one, so plugging it back in, you want to make sure it's correctly inserted before you give it that force. And then lastly, our USB connection. And then when we reinsert, we'll just make sure our wires are clear of these screw locations and not pinching. It can pinch in the case. See right here, want to be careful not to insert the screws and tighten them down with those wires in between. So before I tighten all six of these screws, I'm going to make sure now remember that screw up here I had mentioned is for its little safety secure lock-in. You'll want to make sure you just put that back as well. I got my 4 screws here, the smaller ones. Just going to do a little visual and make sure that all of these wires are clear. Okay, I'm going to put the larger ones in. I'll tighten down. Now I have an automatic drill stop for a certain amount of torque. But like I said, all of these just need to be about hand tight. When they get tight, that's fine. All right, and that'll conclude the portion of removing your control panel and reinstalling. Now, before you close everything up, you want to make sure that your machine's going to power on correctly. Make sure your machine powers on correctly and all the functions work. And then once that's completed, go back through, reinsert the control panel base, and it should just slide in just that easily. Now, this cutout will slide in just underneath right here in this gap. Just like that.